A character that's a chef who is from a region that represents China and is violent. Where have I seen this before? Jiao Chu is finally here, and it hasn't been the quietest arrival. Ever since his kit was revealed, there's been a lot of discussion as to whether he is strong enough to warrant a pull over just using strong Nihility characters we already have, like Pela, and then obviously he's a support, so he still has to compete against harmonies like Robin, Sparkle, and Ranmei. And honestly, from a numbers perspective, a lot of this discussion is pretty warranted. But what I wanted to talk about, and I've seen a lot of other creators bring it up too, is that Jiao Chu provides a lot of other things that you can't really quantify that might benefit your teams a lot more than you think. Now, before we really get into it, Jiao Chu is a new character, so I'll quickly run over his kit and how it works, but if you already know what it does, I've timestamped in the video, so feel free to skip ahead. A quick disclaimer, but by the time this video is out, Jiao Chu will be in the game, but as of me recording and editing this, I am basing all of the information on pre-release stuff, so that would be videos that other creators have made on the Creator Experience server. If anything does happen to change on live release, I'll leave it in a pinned comment, but hopefully not, and if something does happen, hopefully it's just a numbers change that won't affect his gameplay too much. Alright. Now with that all out of the way, to start understanding Jiao Chu's kit, we have to go over his talent first, which is his debuff. So when Jiao Chu hits an enemy with any of his attacks, so that would be his basic attack, skill, or ultimate, there's going to be a 100% base chance to inflict one stack of Ashen Roast on them. Now Ashen Roast is his debuff, and you'll be hearing this a lot throughout his kit. Now once Ashen Roast is on an enemy, they'll take increased damage by up to 15%. Now that's just at one stack. Each subsequent stack increases this by 5% and it caps out at 5 stacks. So for example, if an enemy has 3 stacks of Ashen Roast on them, the first stack will be the 15%, and then will be 5 and another 5 to bring it to a total of 25% damage increase. Now, once they are afflicted with Ashen Roast, they will also get a burn dot on them, which scales off Jiao Chu's own attack. Now, for his basic attack, it's very simple, just a normal basic attack, but a reminder, with his talent, this also inflicts 1 stack of Ashen Roast. His skill is a blast ability that does damage based on Jiao Chu's attack, but more importantly, it also has an 100% base chance of inflicting 1 Ashen Roast on the primary target. So that means combined with his talent, the target you focus, so the middle guy, will get 2 stacks of his debuff, while each one on either side will get 1 stack. Jiao Chu's ult, Pyrograph Arcanum, sets the number of Ashen Roast stacks on all enemy targets to the highest that is present on the field. So if any of the enemies has 5 stacks, which is the max, after you use your ult, everyone on the field will get the 5 stacks. Now an easy way to see how many stacks each enemy has is once you target them, if you just look at the top, you'll see a little number with a little icon, and that's just going to be his Ashen Roast stacks. Now on top of that, he also deploys a zone. Now when he does this, he does deal fire damage equal to his attack to all enemies, but once again, it's a quite negligible. But more importantly, in this zone, enemy targets receive 15% increased damage from ultimates, and whenever enemies take action within this zone, there's also going to be a 60% chance of them being inflicted with 1 stack of Ashen Roast. This effect though can only trigger up to 6 times for each enemy target, and it can only be triggered once per turn, but normally 6 times is enough in most situations. Now finally, the zone lasts 3 turns, and its duration decreases by 1 every time Jiao Chu takes a turn. You can think of this exactly like how Ranmei's skill works. His technique creates an area around him, or a dimension, and when entering combat in this dimension, it deals fire damage to all the enemies and also applies 1 stack of Ashen Roast. Now, only one dimension created by allies can exist at any time, so if you were to play him with a character like Robin, who also has a dimension technique, you will have to judge which one is going to be better for you when starting the combat. And finally, with his traces. His A2 trace just gives him 15 energy whenever the battle starts. His A4 trace states that for every 15% of Jiao Chu's effect hit rate that exceeds 80%, he receives additional attack by 60% up to 240. Now, his attack scalings aren't that big, especially because he most likely won't be critting, as you will be building him with tank and effect hit rate, but this does affect the dot damage that gets applied with his Ashen Roast. And finally, his A6 trace. His A6 trace is incredibly important to his kit and kind of overpowered. While the zone created by his ultimate exists, when enemies enter combat, they player will be afflicted with Ashen Roast, and the number of stacks applied will match the highest number of Ashen Roast stacks possessed by an enemy on the field. So if you have an elite enemy on the field that has 5 stacks of Ashen Roast, whenever any summon or new waves come, they'll all instantly receive 5 stacks if Jiao Cho's ult is active. So basically, Jiao Cho is taking Nihility back to its true roots, which is debuffing enemies, and he has a lot of debuffs. He's going to be a really good teammate for Acheron. In fact, judging from how his ult just has a straight up ultimate damage increase, I would say he's pretty much designed to be Acheron's best teammate. But as a debuffer, he's also just a good generic support. So think of how versatile Pela was and how many teams you could slot her in. Jiao Cho can basically just take her slot in any of those teams. So obviously there are DPS units that prefer debuffs like Acheron and Dr. Ratio, and they're going to benefit a bit more from using someone like Jiao Cho, but there's nothing stopping you from using him with characters like Yun Li or Jing Yuan. Okay, let's back up and talk about the main source of why there's so much discussion over Jiao Cho's kit. So if we look at how much damage amp Jiao Cho's kit provides, it's super simple. His Ashen Rose at its max stacks, so 5, gives 35% increased damage. If the damage you're dealing is ultimate damage, this jumps up another 15% to take his total to 50% damage increase. Now if we look at someone like Pela, Pela is our premier 4-star Nihility debuffer, and she can give a max of 42% defense shred in her kit through her ultimate. Now 42% defense shred comes to about a 29% increased damage, which is very impressive. So comparing the two characters, not including ultimate damage, Pela and Jiao Cho are honestly very similar in their damage increasing potentials, 29% versus 35%. If you include the ultimate damage, Jiao Cho does take quite a big lead, but that obviously doesn't apply to all the DPS cost we have right now. So basically the source of discussion is whether it's worth committing potentially up to 180 pulls for a character that gives you not as big of an increase as some people might have been looking for over a 4-star character like Pela. And I'm here to tell you that Jiao Cho provides so much comfort in how easy it is to apply his Def Shred, on how easy it is to keep uptime on his Def Shred, that even though the numbers may put them quite close together, Jiao Cho is going to outperform Pela by a significant margin most of the time. First, we have Pure Fiction. Now, I don't think anyone was really doubting how good he would be in Pure Fiction, but basically, Nihility characters kind of suck in Pure Fiction. Because of how quickly you clear through waves in Pure Fiction, characters like Pela can't keep up with how often she needs to use her ult to constantly have debuffs on the enemies, so you'd much rather run a Harmony character with your DPS units, unless of course you're Acheron. Now with Jiao Cho, because of his A6 talent, which is so bloody strong, every time an enemy enters the field, they'll instantly receive 5 stacks of Ashen Roast as long as there's another enemy on the field that's been debuffed. This not only stacks Acheron's ult really fast, but also just makes him a really good Pure Fiction support for pretty much every character. This basically 100% uptime Jiao Cho has on his debuff also just has huge benefits in other game modes like MOC or Apocalyptic Shadow. So for example, once you kill the first wave in MOC and the second one shows up, Jiao Cho's debuffs will carry over, while someone like Pela and Silverwolf, they'll have to get their ults and reapply it to this new wave of enemies. Jiao Cho basically just keeps your damage uptime a lot more frequent, and with someone who really cares about having debuffs on enemies like Dr. Ratio, it means you basically never have to worry about losing follow-ups from his skill. So now that we know why he's so strong and how his quality of life and comfort just brings so much to the table, should you pull him? Well, firstly, if you really like him, whether it is just his character, what he looks like, or just anything, go ahead and pull him. He's a really strong character. You'll definitely not be disappointed with how he performs. But if you're someone who's a bit more on the fence and is thinking from more of a meta perspective, we can go over a few more things. If you're looking to make your Acheron team a bit stronger, Jiao Cho is going to be a great pull. You can either replace Pela or Silverwolf, and he's going to work perfectly fine. If you don't have Silverwolf and you've been playing Acheron with Pela plus someone else, Jiao Cho is going to be an even bigger upgrade for you over someone like Gui Naifen. And if you're someone with E2 Acheron, Jiao Cho will be the best Nihility to run paired with her, as he'll just provide the biggest debuffs as well as the most amount of ult stacks. If you're someone who plays Dot, Jiao Cho is a reasonable character to consider, but only if you really don't have the premium Dot team already. If you don't have Black Swan or Ranmei, you can slot Jiao Cho in both of their positions, and he'll do a reasonable job. He won't be as good as them in most scenarios though, unless you have E2, but then we're dealing with a whole different character. Dr. Ratio is going to be the last character that Jiao Cho synergizes with especially well, just because having basically a permanent debuff on the enemy is going to be really useful for Ratio's follow-up attacks. An example of a team you might run is having Dr. Ratio with Jiao Cho, Robin, and Aventurine. Now finally, as a universal support, like I said before, you can run Jiao Cho in pretty much any place you would normally use Pela. Whether he's going to be the optimal choice is always going to be a case-by-case scenario, as he is competing with a lot of other Harmony characters. So for whatever team you're thinking of putting him in, probably have a bit more of a deeper look into whether that team can really benefit from the stuff Jiao Cho is adding.